We're back once again for session 5 of EVision 2022. This is the last, but certainly not the least of all sessions, as it is dedicated to customer acceptance. Adoption of e-mobility is more, much more than an economic or environmental phenomenon. It is a psychological one that hinges on customer acceptance. Customers can either drive the transition or stop it in its tracks. EV adoption will truly accelerate when the hearts and the minds of customers are won, when there is a greater choice of affordable vehicles, the possibility to charge everywhere quickly and reliably, and when driving is simple and seamless, irrespective of the type of electric vehicle you drive. How do we get there? What does it take? This is the question at the heart of this final session, which will be moderated by Urska Skrut, Manager Mobility at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Urska, please enlighten us.
Welcome back to EVision, Power Sector Accelerating E-Mobility. My name is Urska Skrt. I'm Mobility Manager at World Business Council for Sustainable Development, leading the topic of mobility decarbonization, and I'm excited to have the ability to moderate this session today. We will now be joined by Alexander Verduin, Alternative Fuels Infrastructure, Head of Sustainable Transport Forum at DG Move. He will introduce the upcoming discussion.
Thank you for introducing me, Urska, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to speak at this Euroelectric conference and in particular on this session dedicated to consumer acceptance. Next slide, please. About 4 years ago now, our alternative fuels team developed a consumer-centric vision for electromobility to guide our legislative and supporting work. The pictogram you can see on this slide here has been hanging above my desk ever since. Now, why did we develop this pictogram? Because we are convinced that giving consumers access to correct and complete information will be absolutely key to make the electromobility market a success. We then have identified different levers to achieve this and drew up a roadmap for their implementation, categorizing the actions as legislative or non-legislative. Next slide, please. Now, I think you've all seen the results of our legislative action last year. Our proposal for an alternative fuels infrastructure regulation, or AFIR, contains a number of provisions to improve consumer information. The recast Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, or EBBD, subsequently complemented these for recharging points in buildings. Now, as you are aware, two of the key barriers to the uptake of electromobility by consumers are: one, range anxiety, the fear of not being able to travel as far as one would want to on a single charge, and secondly, charge anxiety, the fear of not being able to find an available recharger in due time. Our AFIR and EPBD proposals aim to tackle these fears heads-on. With binding distance-based targets on the TEN-T network, fleet-based targets at national level, and binding targets for deployment of recharging points in buildings, we want to significantly increase the available amount of recharging points in the EU. The EPBD, moreover, mandates the right to charge in multi-dwelling buildings, making it much easier for co-owners to install recharging points in shared underground parking lots. Next slide, please. But simply having them installed is not enough. Consumers should know where to find them and be confident to find them operational and available for use. That is why the AFIR proposal obliges all charge point operators in the EU to make certain essential data related to their publicly accessible recharging points available at no cost. This provision also tackles another recurrent consumer complaint about recharging: the lack of price transparency. The provision obliges CPOs to make available their ad hoc prices to consumers, making it much easier to compare them in advance. Next slide, please. On top of that, CPOs will have to visibly display the applicable ad hoc prices at their recharging stations. And also e-mobility service providers will have to clearly communicate their prices to consumers, tailored to the intended recharging session. The proposal, moreover, contains a number of important provisions aimed at ensuring reasonable prices and prohibiting discriminatory price setting. In addition, with a view to allowing any consumer to recharge anywhere in the EU, the AFIR mandates clear and convenient payment options for ad hoc recharging. These, in essence, make the use of bank cards the norm for pay-as-you-go transactions. Both AFIR and the EPBD mandate smart charging readiness for slow chargers to ensure recharging will take place at the most convenient time for the electricity grid and at the lowest cost for consumers. The AFIR also explicitly recognizes the technology of automatic authentication, but in this respect gives primacy to consumer choice, as it mandates an opt-out option at every recharging point. Last but not least, and essential to avoid consumer lock-in, AFIR contains some safeguards against the foreclosure of networks and other anti-competitive behavior. Next slide, please. As mentioned, in parallel to preparing the legislative action, our team also took a number of non-legislative actions to support EV uptake by consumers. In relation to the lack of information for consumers, we have gradually turned the basic European Observatory on Alternative Fuels, better known as EAFO, into the reference database for information about alternative fuels vehicles, infrastructure, and support schemes. EAFO contains an interactive map which shows close to all recharging points in the EU. EAFO 3.0, which will be launched by or before the beginning of next quarter, will contain a new knowledge center, including a section dedicated to consumers. It will contain a TCO calculator, information about available EV models, information about recharging prices in the EU, an annual consumer monitor, and so on and so forth. Moreover, through a dedicated subgroup of the Sustainable Transport Forum, or STF, we are currently preparing the harmonization of e-mobility communication standards. With uniform standards, we can ensure interoperability of the entire recharging ecosystem to support e-roaming and thus easy contract-based payments for consumers across the EU. Last but not least, I would like to point to the work of the STF Public Authorities subgroup. This group shares best practices between public authorities of all levels in the EU and includes observers from front-running EV countries such as Norway and California. The group developed and continues to develop various policy recommendations in which consumer acceptance and user-friendliness always take a central place. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, I have finished my brief overview of the work the European Commission is doing to improve consumer acceptance of electromobility. Thank you for your attention.
This session will look at the details for enhancing the consumer acceptance of electric vehicles. Euroelectric study points out that utilities, local authorities, and digital solution providers need to cooperate to make sure that the charging experience of European customers is improved. Today on the panel, we have some great speakers. We have Karen Van Cluysen from Secretary General from Polis Network. We have Eric Plaquette, President and CEO of GIREF, Kyriakos Kofinas, Chief E-Mobility Officer of Public Power Corporation, and again, Alexander Verduin, Head of Sustainable Transport Forum, DG Move. My first question is for Kyriakos Kofinas from Greek Public Power Corporation. And I'm interested as a utility companies, what do you think can be the role of utilities easing the customer pain points and accelerating the uptake of e-mobility?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm glad connecting to the EV session. Well, there are four main areas where utility companies can contribute, which are sustainable mobility, public charging, supercharging, and installing safe private chargers. Utilities know well the importance of transforming the energy generation and the supply to sustainable solutions. Therefore, sustainable mobility, that is a customer's concern, is a natural area where utilities can contribute. Specifically, for utilities companies like PPC with the Blue e-mobility brand, we can establish the biggest network of public charging in Greece, fully powered by renewable energy, since green energy is a utility company priority. Utilities company have the reach, the knowledge, the experience, and the investment power to do so. Another major customer pain for the electric vehicle drivers is, of course, the range anxiety, especially along transportation hubs. Again, here, utility companies have the capacity of supplying not only with superchargers, but also efficiently with the additional power capacity needed to operate such charging hubs. Also, along with partners utilities, they can offer the best tailored supercharging infrastructure and services, basically leveraging the experience they have in the medium voltage installations. I need to stress here, however, that the significant role is also with grid operators that should respond and secure the grid extension needed with efficient and cost-effective services. Last but not least, the utilities contribute in helping the customers with wallbox private installations at homes or businesses. We at PPC, we can offer, for example, integrated turnkey product service solutions to retail customers applying with different options of their choice, installations to their specific space, parking space, business or home, the connection there, at business or at home, and necessarily also with a foolproof safety, which is a significant prerequisite that the utility company can help guarantee to facilitate a reliable private charging solution.
Thank you, Kyriakos. My second question is to Eric Plaquette from GRF. And as interoperability of the charging process and ability to charge quickly but also easily is a major part of ensuring the customer satisfaction. I'm interested, how are companies like GRF contributing to this?
Hello, everybody. I'm pleased to attend this session. Yes, you're right, Oscar. I guess interoperability is key in the whole process. Obviously, as everyone can understand, because thanks to interoperability, you can be sure that with one e-mobility card, you can access to many charging points everywhere. And that's very important because you don't want to come to a charging point and then get some message like, sorry, subscriber unknown, we cannot charge you. Another very important thing lies in the access to POI information, all the data concerning the charging points like GPS location, type of connectors, opening hours, and so on. Here, thanks to interoperability platforms, you have an aggregation of millions of POI data, which means not only static data, as I just described, but also dynamic data, like busy, available, out of order, in service, and so on. And obviously, a function of the interoperability platform is to clean those data. For instance, when you got a charging point saying, I'm available like 1 million times in a minute, then you have to clean this straight ahead to avoid that kind of information, to bring some pollution to everybody in the ecosystem. More generally, interoperability platforms are identifying malfunctions, failures, and reporting these failures to everybody so that the all players can take action, and the end user is not doesn't see the problem. So quality is very important because now we see that we have more and more very nice electric cars and more charging points. And what is becoming key for the ecosystem is the increase of overall quality. So we try to do all this as a digital central player in this ecosystem, and we try to participate with Alexander and his colleagues to every working groups with FTF, DGMove, and so on the plug and charge, on governance, on data protection, transparency, accessibility, and so on. As a central player, I think our role is to boost the global quality of the ecosystem.
Thank you, Eric. My next question is to Karen from Polis. So in these processes, local authorities can play a leading role, either as conveners of parties or users of shared data, or just setting the right framework to the transition to electric mobility. How do authorities do all this, keeping in mind the user's perspective, but also how to generate businesses?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to share our views from the perspective of cities and regions. So let me maybe zoom out a little bit to begin with and point out that the starting point for local authorities are the policy goals that they have in terms of improving urban mobility and making it more sustainable. And the main challenges they face in the transport field and that need to be tackled are improving air quality, reducing congestion, improving road safety, and of course the need to decarbonize the transport sector. And it's these challenges that very much steer local mobility policies. And in that respect, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan is an important instrument to develop a long-term vision with clear policy goals that go beyond political election cycles and allow for the development of integrated packages of measures that ideally tick several boxes and address different challenges in one go. And at the heart of a sustainable urban mobility policy is actually a modal shift away from the private car in urban cores and a reallocation in favor of sustainable modes of transport. And it's in that context that electrification is only one of many solutions that cities are deploying to reach their goals. And it's definitely not the holy grail or silver bullet, but that also applies to other solutions. Now, having said that, we do want the cars that do remain in cities and will always remain in cities to be clean and preferably shared as well. And many of our cities and regions are playing a leading role in pushing the rollout of electromobility, helping to create the necessary critical mass through incentives for users, but also for fleet owners, by implementing charging infrastructure and pushing for the electrification of captive fleets in particular. It's also important to highlight that we adopt a multimodal approach to electromobility with a very promising role for the e-bike, for example, which we consider to be an important part of the ecosystem. So indeed, local authorities should play and are actually already playing a leading role in accelerating the deployment of EVs. And besides the SUMPs that I mentioned, the development and implementation of air quality and climate strategies offer important frameworks for that respect. Now, when we look at the transport transformation that is in front of us, we see that regions and cities hold many of the keys when it comes to transforming the sector and are often actually adopting very ambitious goals and setting clear targets by implementing innovative measures to protect the health of their citizens and of the environment, which is the ultimate priority. It's clear at the same time that they cannot do it alone and that the need that is there to be empowered by other levels of government as well, whether it's the national level, which is actually still often a challenge in terms of making sure that they properly consult the local and regional levels, but also the European level, of course, and the EU policies that Alexander also mentioned in his keynote are really key to facilitate the cooperation and to regulate the interaction between different stakeholders and governance levels. So we really also welcome, for example, the AFIEF proposal, since it focuses on resolving previously identified problems and gaps in terms of member states' ambitions, the coherence and even distribution of recharging infrastructure, persistent interoperability challenges, and a publicly accessible infrastructure that still does not fully meet all user requirements. So it's within this context and looking at all users and other transport modes that cities are defining low and zero emission roadmaps in which electromobility strategies are being included. One of these key instruments that we see more and more in cities is the introduction of urban vehicle access regulations, for example, including low and even zero emission zones. These kind of measures are rarely met with great enthusiasm at first, but they're really instrumental in moving forward and reaching the ambitions and targets that have been set also on the European level, for example. So cities really have no choice but to go down that road. And that approach of zero emission zones will definitely also favor, of course, the rollout of electric mobility. And as an example, we have the Brussels Capital Region that made important commitments towards phasing out internal combustion engines and promoting electromobility. By 2030, they will ban diesel vehicles. By 2035, also petrol and LPG vehicles. Similarly, London has moved to an ultra-low emission zone in 2019 and is, through a phased approach, moving towards zero emission London-wide by 2050. Same for the city of Paris, which is introducing this in different phases, and the city of Amsterdam as well through its Clean Air Action Plan. Another key instrument for local authorities is the rollout and tendering, of course, of recharging infrastructure. And good examples in that respect are Amsterdam and Rotterdam. They're really leading the way in terms of defining the approach to deploy the infrastructure, organizing the tendering and setting its requirements. And numerous examples from Amsterdam in particular are available in the tendering recommendations that were issued by the Sustainable Transport Forum that was mentioned by Alexander, including recommendations on e-parking policies, for example, requirements that are being set on durability, on support and maintenance of infrastructure, the maximum and equal price for end consumers and electric mobility service providers, requirements in the field of software that should be free from IPR, and open standards that need to be deployed so that also at the end of a concession there can be an easy transfer. Also, Rotterdam is an example of ambitious electromobility goals, and they're looking at charging infrastructure and parking policies in an integrated way. For example, they organized the first tendering process for infrastructure in 2010 in public on-street spaces. And then in 2013, they also started looking at the electrification of public parking garages, and more recently also at public park and ride spaces. But Rotterdam, as many other local authorities, and this is where I want to conclude, are still facing challenges and questions that need to be resolved together with the other stakeholders, such as the balancing of parking space, so the trend of incentivizing EV parking versus, on the other hand, reducing more and more on and off-street parking in urban cores, the issue of semi-public and private charging infrastructure locations and their financing, information and legislation regarding fire safety, data and interoperability issues, smart charging, renewable energy and storage, and governance issues in terms of different competences also across different countries. So basically, public authorities are really doing their share, and Polis is really glad to contribute to Eurelectric EVision together with other partners and market players to really achieve this full local integration as well of transport and energy systems, considering all user needs, behavior, as well as other transport modes, with the aim finally to meet air quality and decarbonization goals. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. My next question is to Alexander Verdun from DG Move. Clearly, the European Commission is doing a lot to support the transition. Many of the recent European Commission proposals go in the direction of empowering consumers to make the transition to electric mobility, either through increasing the readiness of EV market or improving the charging experience and making sure we can charge easily. So what is the missing block, according to you, in this transition?
Yeah, thank you, Urška. That's a good question. First of all, I hope that in my keynote speech, I have shown that the Commission has already done quite a lot, put a lot forward on the table already to help consumers and support the uptake of electromobility by consumers. So I would say first and foremost, let's get the AFIR and the EPBD proposals adopted by the co-legislators. Let's keep the ambition. Let's keep the ambition intact. And then, in particular for the EPBD, of course, let's also then move to a speedy transposition by the member states. So that would be, of course, my first point on this one. Then I think once that is finally done, we of course need to get all those million recharging points which we've promised by 2025. We need to get them on the ground. And I think Kyriakos has already mentioned that the permitting and grid connection procedures, there are still major hurdles for project developers. So here, and they're causing basically delays to projects all over the EU. We hear it from all kinds of countries, all kinds of directions. So we are developing, actually, with the Sustainable Transport Forum, we are developing guidance to basically help public authorities streamline these processes, harmonize them, possibly throughout the EU. And actually, Polis is leading this task. So thanks a lot for that. That's a good opportunity to highlight that as well. And I think the first input that we've received, because we've consulted public authorities on this, on how they do this, and what are their best practices that they want to share in this respect. And we already have some very promising examples, ranging from in the Netherlands, exemptions, full exemptions from the administrative permitting procedures, ranging to also solutions to address the fire safety concerns in underground parking garages, which Karen just mentioned. So hopefully we can provide some useful guidance for these kind of situations. And then last but not least, and I think that's certainly not only a role for the European Commission, is to invest in better consumer information. I've already mentioned the European Alternative Fuels Observatory and the upcoming consumer information section, but I think that is really just the start. There is a huge role here for let's say the lower levels of governance that are in the end the closest to the citizens, and that can also help and address the citizens in their own language, which is still, of course, a bit of a shortcoming at our level. We always reach the same constituency. So it would be good if local levels now also start better informing consumers, because there's still a lot of misunderstanding and miscomprehension about electromobility, about the ranges that are possible with EVs, about the availability of recharging infrastructure, because there's much more infrastructure than many people think. So I think there's a huge role to play there still. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, and all the speakers. Now we move to the short interactive debate. And my first question would be, with the evolving value chain, new players emerge. Energy flexibility aggregator, e-mobility service provider, charging point operator. So what is the role of these players in increasing the customer acceptance? And maybe I give the first word to Eric.
Yes, I guess in this value chain, what is important is that now we are identifying specific players, and those players have to focus on their part of the global value chain and try to enhance the quality of the global system. And this is true for governments with the relevant subventions, policies. This is obviously very true for local authorities, as Karen was saying, because local authorities are key in developing green transportation solutions. But you got the same problem at CPO level, and they keep trying. They keep improving their quality in terms of management of the charging points and providing the information to the rest of the ecosystem, up to EMSP mobility providers, obviously, who need to provide the end user with complete, accurate, and refreshed, updated information regarding the charging points, and also needs to provide transparent and understandable prices, because transparency and price consistency is something very key to adoption by the end user. Our part as at GIREV as a central digital platform is precisely to assist all the players in boosting their quality. So, for instance, when it comes to local authorities, as far as we got a lot of data, meaning charging infrastructure data, both historical, current status, and prospective, all the data regarding consumption, who needs to charge, when and how much, and so we can help local authorities implement efficient strategies and policies at their level. We more and more we start working also with the energy players, flexibility aggregators, distributors, because we guys know that maybe in 4 years in some region you will need one nuclear plant to provide the energy for all those cars, and so we can communicate this information to everybody. Try to make this the global equation more efficient, and we need also to, I guess. Today we are playing the part of the digital infrastructure in the charging ecosystem, and we need to extend this to new technologies and to new business models. For instance, talking about plug and charge, then you will have the same need for intermediation, the same need for data sharing, data protection, cybersecurity. And we at GREV are providing this, and we will provide this for plug and charge purposes. We need also to integrate those intermediations in new business models. As Karen was saying, we need to integrate intermediation to take into account the park and charge solutions that are developed in many cities by many players and will be more and more developed in the future. We need to integrate also the charging ecosystem and charging intermediation into a more global picture when it comes to mobility as a service, because mobility as a service is something bigger, but you have exactly the same problems and the same need for intermediation, for data sharing, and for safe and smooth solutions. So I guess as a central player, digital player, we need to take all this into account for the global ecosystem to go in the right direction.
Thank you, Eric. Maybe Karen, how do you see this role of new players supporting the uptake of EV market?
No, their respective roles are very important as far as we are concerned. And actually, public authorities have kind of had to reposition themselves throughout the past years when all these innovations were coming from the private sector, while mobility service provision used to be, the responsibility of the public sector mostly in the past. So they've also had to redefine their own role in terms of taking up the responsibility as a kind of orchestrator of all these new different entities and stakeholders that are coming to the table. And very important in that respect also when orchestrating and directing, let's say, this diverse group is always keeping these governance aspects in the back of their minds and the public policy goals they have set themselves. And that's why it's also important from their perspective to regulate innovation, to make it policy responsive and aligned with policy goals, because public and private interests might, of course, be different as well. When it comes to the specific roles, we also see an increasing level of cooperation between the public authorities and new mobility service operators that are bringing new types of mobility modes, especially shared mobility modes and electric mobility modes to the urban mobility ecosystem. And I think they will really have a key role to play in increasing customer acceptance of electromobility. They can also renew their fleets more often, and they can really push for a wide-scale adoption of electric vehicles in our city. So we believe in the very strong roles of the different respective players, as also Eric was already mentioning, with an overarching umbrella responsibility for the cities themselves.
Thank you, Karen. Maybe Mr. Kofinas, do you have a thought on the new roles of players that are emerging in the market, and where do you see the key, especially for the efficient integration of the energy and the transport sector?
Thank you, Uska. Indeed, actually, the commercial fleets are very significant, basically clients for the EV opportunities out in the market and also for the different usage cases. Basically, we can identify two usage cases: commercial vehicles, of course, and also city logistics delivery fleets. In the first case, I can say we are exploring collaboration with leasing companies to provide, of course, charging infrastructure for their customers, both in business as well as in private setup. In the second case, which are the logistic fleets, I think this is also very important, since logistic distribution operate within an urban environment where practically e-mobility has a distinctive sustainability advantage to offer. For example, I can refer to Greece. That's a good case because this is a typical country that is suffering from two situations. The first one is from traffic congestion, and the second one is suffering from a much lower percentage of parking space ownership, both at business and at private locations. Therefore, the solutions then that e-mobility can offer should consider both electric vehicle flexible solution, as well as, I would say, smart last mile lighter or smaller delivery options and vehicles. So this is a good example, actually, where e-mobility can really make a lot of difference, actually, for the commercial fleets and also for the sustainability in the urban environment.
Thank you. Maybe Eric, how are your solutions helping to address the needs of the EV fleets? How are you accelerating this transition?
Well, yes, we try to help as everybody tries, because it's like in the financial sphere, fleets are represent a big volume, and they are to some extent predictable also in terms of use cases. So when something is big and predictable, then it becomes interesting to invest into. What we can do at our level is to provide with metrics, with appropriate data and reports, because when you're talking about the fleet, it's a little bit different from a subscriber base of end users for an EMSP provider. It's something a little bit more specific, which needs to rely on different types of metrics, of analytics, and because we see things at a very detailed and complete level on hundreds of thousands of charging points, we need to bring this, but in the form of relevant information to fleet owners, so that they can plan, they can manage their fleets in terms of invoicing also. And at the same time, we need to take care about personal data protection and security, as well as for everybody. So I would say the challenges are quite the same, but needs to be adapted to the specificity of fleet management.
Thank you very much, Eric. There is also a risk of social and economic inequality when it comes to charging infrastructure and the cost for consumers. And we see that there is a local planning policy demanding EV charging points that can be a make or break factor. So a question to Alexander and Karen: how are authorities addressing this issue? And maybe we start now with Alexander.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, it is clear that, let's say, the social aspects of the energy transition and in general, the energy transition, but also transport transition cannot, of course, be overlooked. We've seen already, let's say, the Yellow Vests protests in France. So clearly, if we want to get everybody on board, we need to make sure that everybody also has the ability to make the transition to electromobility. Now, I think what we've seen, as I've already mentioned, so through EAFO, we gather a lot of data on also support schemes in the EU, and we see, of course, that bridging the gap between the purchase gap between an ICE and an EV vehicle is still one of the, let's say, the key factors that are helping consumers make the change currently. Of course, these in the end, of course, we see that also we expect that by 2025, more or less, let's say the purchase cost of an electric vehicle will be more or less similar to an ICE. So hopefully by then these will not be necessary. Such type of support schemes will no longer be necessary. But in the meantime, they can be, of course, be very important and helpful to help people make that change. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Karen?
Yes, I fully agree that a just transition is indeed very important when we look at transforming the transport sector, making sure that we don't leave anyone behind in that process, and that includes obviously also electrification. We have just at the end of last year with Polis launched our Just Transition Agenda, which is precisely looking at how new measures such as electromobility, but also others, can be rolled out in an inclusive way. What I think is also important in that respect is that we need to move away from the false narrative, which is saying that that pricing measures or urban vehicle access regulations are harming those which are already the most vulnerable in society. The reality shows us that it's different, and that actually those that are the most exposed to air pollution and noise pollution, for example, are not the ones owning a car in many cases, and are living in urban cores, so they get all the negative effects, but they would also be benefiting from radical measures that try to improve the situation and improve air quality, for example, rather than being hit again by such measures. Now, when we then zoom in, and indeed incentives for vehicle purchase remain important, but let me, as Alexander said, but let me maybe say a few words about the charging infrastructure that you were also referring to in your question. We see that many cities, to define the location of public recharging infrastructure, they are using a demand-driven approach. For example, Rotterdam has been looking at EV ownership and infrastructure usage when deciding on where to further locate charging infrastructure. But they're also looking at the future, so not just at the current situation, but also at the future in terms of looking at different types of users, whether it's residents or commuters or visitors, and the charging demand as well of different sectors, so not just private passenger vehicles, but also public transport fleets and urban freight vehicles, for example. And Rotterdam has really mapped the total demand of the city and is also in dialogue with the electric grid operators to identify the future needs in different areas of the city, including also the type of chargers that would be required. And it is now moving towards a more data-driven model. So also coming back to the importance of data that was highlighted by Eric. So they are now defining its on and off-street infrastructure location policies using a data-driven model that is also going to predict demand based on real usage. And for its latest standard, the grid operator has been part of the project from the beginning, but also EV drivers as well as non-EV drivers have been consulted in the process. Let me also highlight another example. So with the Brussels Capital Region, again, they have implemented or are implementing this low emission mobility roadmap, which is also including a wide range of supporting measures to ensure this really fair transition for both businesses and households towards zero emission mobility. But they're not just looking at general households and businesses, but also, for example, at people with reduced mobility and what the impact will be of the wider scale deployment of charging infrastructure for mobility impaired and disabled people using public space as well. But so they are, for example, strengthening and redesigning the low emission zones bonus offered to Brussels SMEs to make it more accessible and to align the purchase price of an electric utility vehicle with that of its thermic equivalent. And they're also making leasing vehicles available. They also have appointed a mobility and precariousness manager within the administration. So also to pay specific attention to people with specific needs or having particular social challenges, to make sure that we also systematically integrate their considerations and concerns into the mobility policies. Then there's this accessibility aspect that I mentioned, which also Brussels is paying particular attention to. And they've also appointed a mobility and fleet facilitator who is kind of acting as an intermediate between the different public entities, but also on the one hand, and then the different companies operating in Brussels on the other hand. So there is a help desk, there is training that is being organized, and really also very tailored support that is being offered. So these are just some examples of how cities are also looking at the social and economic inequality concerns indeed.
Thank you very much, Karen. We have just a bit more time, so I just want to pass the word to all of you, maybe to some final thoughts on how do you see the ecosystem of utilities and local governments and digital solutions really collaborating to enhance this transition. Just quick responses from everyone. And maybe we start with
well, you can imagine many business models and a lot of creativity, technically speaking, and all this is very exciting. I think the key topics for all this to go into the right direction is that we achieve something accessible, open, transparent. Transparency is very important, not only price transparency, but also quality transparency with free competition, of course, avoiding lock-in, as Alexander was saying. We have the same and secure data protected, cyber security, and so on. We have same kind of needs that you can, as I was saying earlier, that the financial sector, which is now quite regulated and open and accessible and so on, with players like Euronext and governance and everything. And in this ecosystem, every player tries to make money by investing in its own portion of the added value. But we need now, I think that we need governance, we need rules, we need standards. And this is very exciting, quite challenging. But I think that this is key.
Thank you.
I think, as you said correctly, cooperation and partnership among all the key stakeholders is very, very critical, actually. And the more are involved, the higher the value can be created. For example, between CPOs, EMSPs, and also between the final consumer, how to leverage the incredible data sharing opportunities I think we have in front of us to improve the services, to become the services more interoperable digitally, and to support the roaming agreements, and finally to develop really services that can be customized to the exact profiles of every user. On the other hand, of course, partnerships and collaboration between CPOs and government and municipalities is also very, very important to establish, of course, the necessary infrastructure across even cities with high traffic congestions, and to offer mobility really as a service.
Maybe Karen or Alexander, you will want to take the stage?
Okay. I, of course, agree with what my colleagues have just said, so I will not repeat it, but let me focus maybe then a bit on the policy dimension and this governance framework, which I think will be important also as a key to success. And there I would like to highlight the need for public authorities to combine carrots and sticks, incentives and disincentives. Indeed, we've been discussing the different types of incentives that are out there to push the electromobility market in a way that it sustains policy goals. But we will also have to bring in sticks, because only by bringing in disincentives, people will seriously start to consider alternatives to the current polluting options they are using. And that means that we finally need to internalize the external costs of polluting car traffic to society. We have to make the polluter pay, and only then people will also start considering alternatives and look at the full picture of the cost of transport. And this will be important in moving forward. And we have to also make sure that we offer our users a wide range of options from a multimodality and intermodality perspective, a wide range of options that together can compete with what is still apparently very appealing, and that's the polluting private car that we still mostly see on our city streets today. And for that multimodality and intermodality to become a reality, we will need physical integration on the ground, also bring these different modes together, shared electric vehicles combined with public transport, combined with active travel, but also digital integration, as was mentioned just now, through mobility as a service, for example, making mobility multimodal, but also user-centric and very easy to engage with.
Thank you. Final remarks from Alexander?
Yes, thank you. I of course, I fully agree with the previous speakers, and in particular what Karen was mentioning on this mobility as a service. I think basically the task for local authorities that they are facing now is huge. At the one hand, they are facing a need to reduce, let's say, car use in general in cities for reasons that go beyond the simple reduction of pollution alone. We have the traffic jams, the daily traffic jams that you see, for example, in Brussels, which are causing not only congestion and pollution, but they're also causing a lot of cost to society. So local authorities have to find the right balance between reducing car use and at the same time supporting the uptake of electromobility. So that's, of course, that's not an easy task. So they have to also, when they think of when they redesign streets, they have to think longer term. Will those streets always remain, let's say, available for cars? And when they deploy recharging points, will these streets remain available for cars in the longer run? Or are they not locking in a technology which at some point they will need to get rid of? So that's a difficult task. Because of course the deployment of recharging points also currently many of them are still co-funded, so it also absorbs a lot of public funds. So they have to think wisely before, let's say, investing those scarce public funds. But beyond that, of course, once we are looking at the deployment of recharging points, I think public authorities, they can do a lot, and I've mentioned it already on the permitting and grid connection side. So there we still see a lot of hurdles also at the local level. Lots can be done to support the uptake of electromobility by just making it easier to deploy the infrastructure. And then I think, and that's maybe not necessarily linked to local authorities only, but there's a strong role for DSOs and TSOs also to get much more involved proactively in this process. And I don't mean involved by deploying it themselves, but by rather creating more transparency on the grids, making it clearer where let's say the congestion is in the grids. And basically channeling the investments for recharging points to the places which are less costly from a grid perspective, also where you don't need expensive grid reinforcements. And I think this will in particular become more important once we start rolling out the megawatt charger systems for heavy duty vehicles, where you cannot afford to have lengthy extensions of the grid. So you need to be able to find the right locations where there are, let's say, the highways and the high voltage grids are crossing each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and thank you for all the speakers for your insights. And just to quickly echo what we heard today, we were looking at how to enhance the customer acceptance for electric mobility. For sure, having an easy way to charge the vehicles is something that is able to improve the experience of the drivers and can improve also the acceleration of the vehicle deployment. Electric fleets will be the ones who have the ability to accelerate the transition, and digital solutions on one side can enable better integration of energy and the transport sector, but also able to ensure that maybe we can move with this transition with the optimal cost and trying to allocate the investments where they're most needed. We heard that there is a lot of action both on the city side, but also on the European Commission side, helping to navigate this transition. Market reforms and the clear guidance in terms of the planning are needed. And this can also support the collaboration between the entities that need to move together in order to support the uptake. So with this, I would like to thank everyone for your participation today. It was wonderful to have you on the ether, and I wish you a lovely end of the day.
So this was session 5 of EVision. We have heard that Eurelectrics and EY study points at how utilities, local authorities, and digital solution providers must cooperate to make sure that the charging experience of customers is improved. Michelangelo, what do you make of this session?
Thank you very much, Gail. Well, what to make? It is clear from the members of the ecosystem themselves that the need for cooperation is crucial. We have heard throughout the entire event on the need for cooperation, and here on the need of cooperation for customers. We've said many times that e-mobility is not just an economic phenomenon, it's not just an environmental phenomenon, but most importantly, we could say a psychological phenomenon that hinges on the acceptance of consumers. Local authorities and economic operators are noticing that and restructuring their offers, restructuring their value proposition to make sure that the customers is placed at the center of the universe of e-mobility, not to use once again ecosystem. Something which is quite interesting is that customers are changing themselves. We have started to use the concept of prosumers as producers and consumers of electricity or energy. And exactly this type of challenge is something that the operators are trying to address and trying to face. Once again, via better use and better share of data, by a more reasonable and granular planning that sees the involvement of European, national and local communities. This is the only way we can achieve that organization and that order, I would say, that we need for e-mobility deployment.
Thank you so much, Michelangelo, for your take on this session. This is now the end of the event, but before we finish, I would want to give you the floor still for a couple of minutes of concluding remarks. Michelangelo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gael. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the EVision 2022, our annual flagship conference on e-mobility. This has been quite a 2-day, if I may. More than 1,000 registered participants, members of the entire e-mobility ecosystem have participated to 5 different exciting sessions in which we have debated the present trends and projections on the uptake, on the acceleration of e-mobility in Europe. Something that is quite interesting is that we have just started what we need to do, and more specifically, we have just started what we have defined at Eurelectric as the electric decade. By 2030, we have high targets and high ambitions. We have seen, thanks to the study that we have published together with EY, that the numbers of electric vehicles on European road will reach 65 million units, while at the same time, the number of chargers will jump up to 34 million chargers. We know as well that new CO2 emission standards for both light-duty and heavy-duty vehicles will have kicked in. We know that new emission standards and new limits for the pollutant emissions of road vehicles will be in. So this is no exaggeration when I say that mobility is thoroughly changing. However, it's not only mobility that is changing, it's also the energy sector, and how these two sectors are impacting each other's and driving each other's evolutions is absolutely remarkable. In general, the total electricity demand by 2030 will increase by 1.8%, jumping to a total of 3.5 thousand terawatt hour in Europe. We know that the amount of vehicles, the amount of electric vehicles that I've mentioned just now, will not be integrated into the electric grid like this with just a moment, just a blink of an eye, but will require technological solutions that our members are deploying, that our members know how to operate and have already operated in the last years. Smart and flexible solutions, according to our findings, should be capable of shaving up to 21% of the peak load on the electricity grid. All the time we hear of problems related to the electric vehicles connecting for charging sessions all together, possibly during the evening when all the Europeans come back from a day at work. Well, that's exactly when and where these technological solutions will kick in and provide their added value. This is, however, not just a story of technological solutions. I've said it, we have them, we are already implementing them. This is not the end of the story. More importantly, this is a story of consumer acceptance. You have heard me saying repeatedly during these days that e-mobility is a psychological phenomenon, making sure that the ideas and opinions of European customers can be changed by demonstrating the facts related, for example, to the granularity of the charging infrastructure, related to, for example, the range of electric vehicles. But most importantly, it's a story of winning their hearts, showing them that electric vehicles are not more difficult and complex compared to more internal combustion engine powered vehicles, showing them that this will not be a story of going to gas pumps or oil pumps to fill their tanks, but rather than the electricity and energy powering those vehicles will be everywhere they are, everywhere they can, they will be capable of charging. This is the future that we believe in, and this is the future for which our members are working. In order to do that, in order to power that transition, our members are indeed placing the consumers at the center of their processes, at the center of their industrial operations, their new marketing propositions. This is shown by the incredible amount of partnerships and cooperation agreements that the power sector is signing with all the other members of the e-mobility ecosystem. We have finally learned that optimization of our services and offers and the higher efficiency in the services that we can provide to the customers has to pass through cooperation and partnerships. Let me sum up with a little quote from a car ad from 2021. That car ad from a major European car manufacturers was mentioning that the future's electric. Well, here at Euroelectric, we believe that the present is already electric, and the future will only be more electric than what we have nowadays. In order to get it right, in order to get it in a flexible and efficient way, we need the voice of all the actors and all the stakeholders, both in Brussels and in all the European capitals and at the local level. This is the reason why, with our colleagues here in Brussels, we have launched the Mobility Business Hub together with other members of the ecosystem, and we hope that the conversations from these last 2 days will only be a conversation starter rather than the end of a journey that we would like to work together. So thank you once again for your attention and time. Hope to see you soon. Thanks.